In the deep silence of space, no one can hear you scream. That is what the movies tell us. But in April 1967, that was not true. On a remote American military base in Turkey, analysts at a secret NSA listening post were bored. They were scanning the radio frequencies, looking for Soviet military chatter. Suddenly, their equipment spiked. They picked up a transmission coming from the sky. It wasn't a code, it wasn't data, it was a voice. The voice belonged to a man, and he was terrified. The American translators leaned in, pressing their headphones tight against their ears. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. The man wasn't just speaking, he was crying, he was screaming in rage. As his ship plummeted toward the earth, turning into a ball of fire, he was cursing the people who put him there. He cursed the engineers, he cursed the generals, he cursed the Soviet Union. This is the story of Vladimir Komarov, the man who knew he was going to die, but strapped himself into the rocket anyway. Why? Not for glory, not for country. He did it to save his best friend. Welcome to the Shadow Archives. To understand the tragedy of Soyuz 1, we have to go back to the ground. The year is 1967. The Cold War is freezing. The Soviet Union is desperate. They had been winning the space race for years, putting the first satellite and the first man into orbit. But now, the Americans were catching up. The US was planning to go to the moon. The Soviet leader, Leonid Brezhnev, wanted a miracle. The 50th anniversary of the Communist Revolution was approaching. He demanded a spectacular achievement to show the world the power of the USSR. He didn't just want a launch, he wanted a show. The plan was insane. They would launch one capsule, the Soyuz 1, carrying Vladimir Komarov. The next day, they would launch a second ship, Soyuz 2, with 2 more cosmonauts. The 2 ships would find each other in space, dock, and the cosmonauts would switch ships in mid-air before coming home. It was a complex ballet of engineering that had never been done before. There was just one problem. The ship wasn't ready. The Soyuz 1 was a death trap. The engineers knew it. The designers knew it. Weeks before the launch, a team of technicians inspected the capsule. They didn't find 5 problems. They didn't find 10. They found 203 structural failures. 203. Everything was wrong. The parachutes were too small. The heat sensors were faulty. The power systems were unstable. It wasn't a spaceship. It was a flying coffin. A 10-page report was written. It listed every single deadly flaw. It begged the government to cancel the launch. But this is where the shadow of the Soviet Union falls over the story. In a culture of fear, no one delivers bad news to the king. The report was suppressed. Anyone who tried to delay the launch was demoted, fired, or sent to Siberia. The date was set. The ship would fly, and someone had to be inside it. Vladimir Komarov was one of the best. He was 40 years old, experienced, calm, a father. He was the pride of the cosmonaut corps. But he wasn't alone. His backup pilot, the man who would take his place if he got sick, was a man you know, Yuri Gagarin. Yuri was the first man in space, a global icon, the smiling face of the Soviet Union, and he was also Komarov's best friend. They hunted together. Their families ate dinner together. They were brothers in everything but blood. But Komarov knew about the 203 failures. He knew the parachute tests had failed. He knew that if he sat in that seat, he had a 90% chance of burning alive. His friends told him to refuse. They told him to fake an illness. "Break your leg," they said. "Don't go." But Komarov looked at them with sad eyes and said, "I cannot." Why? Because of the rule of the backup pilot. If Komarov didn't fly, Gagarin would have to fly. Komarov told a reporter friend weeks before the flight, "If I don't make this flight, they'll send the backup. That's Yuri." He paused, and tears came to his eyes. "He will die, and we've got to take care of him." Think about that choice. Komarov decided to walk into the fire, not because he was brave, but because he loved his friend too much to let him die. Yuri Gagarin tried to stop it. Rumors say Gagarin wrote a secret letter to Brezhnev himself, trying to use his fame to stop the launch. He reportedly showed up at the launch site, demanding to be put in a spacesuit to save Komarov. But it was too late. The machine was already moving. April 23rd, 1967. Dawn breaks over the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Vladimir Komarov walks to the bus. Witnesses say he didn't look like a man going to space. He looked like a man going to a funeral. He didn't smile. He didn't wave with enthusiasm. The singing in the bus was quiet. He strapped into the Soyuz 1. The hatch closed, the engines ignited, and he made it to orbit. For a brief moment, there was hope. But the shadow archives tell us the nightmare started almost immediately. As soon as the ship reached space, one of the massive solar panels failed to open. This was a catastrophe. Without that panel, the ship had half power. The navigation systems began to fail. The thermal control broke down. The temperature inside the capsule began to drop. Then, the ship began to spin. Imagine being trapped in a tiny metal box, floating in the void, spinning like a top. Komarov tried to stop it. He fired the thrusters, but the sensors were confused by the sun. The more he fought, the harder the ship spun. On the ground, the mission control was in panic. They canceled the launch of Soyuz 2. There would be no docking. Now, the mission was simply save him. For hours, Komarov fought the ship. He was tired. He was freezing, but he was a master pilot. Against all odds, using manual calculations and looking out the window at the moon, he managed to stabilize the ship enough to fire the retro rockets. He lined it up for re-entry. He was coming home. He entered the atmosphere. The plasma burned around the ship. The G-forces crushed his chest. He survived the fire. The capsule slowed down. He was 7 kilometers above the ground. All he needed was the parachute. Komarov pulled the lever for the main chute. Nothing happened. The sensor had failed. The pressure was wrong. The chute stayed trapped in its canister. The capsule was falling like a stone. He had one chance left, the reserve parachute. He pulled the manual release. The reserve chute shot out, but because the ship was spinning, the reserve chute wrapped around the small drag chute. It tangled, it twisted, it choked itself. There was no air in the canopy, no drag. No slowing down. Vladimir Komarov was falling from the edge of space at 400 miles per hour. He had nearly 2 minutes to fall, 2 minutes to think about his wife, 2 minutes to think about the 203 failures, 2 minutes to realize he had been murdered. This is where the legend of the scream begins. The official Soviet transcripts say he was calm. They say he spoke professionally until the end. But the shadow archives tell a different story. Listening posts in Turkey recorded a man losing his mind. They heard him crying. They heard him screaming at mission control. "Heat is rising in the capsule. You've killed me. The parachute won't open." Some say he cursed the designers. He cursed the government. His final words were a scream of pure betrayal, echoing down from the heavens until silence. The capsule hit the ground near the Ural Mountains with the force of a meteorite. It flattened completely. The retro rockets exploded on impact. When the recovery team arrived, there was no ship, just a burning crater. They shoveled dirt onto the fire to put it out. When the smoke cleared, all that was left of Vladimir Komarov was a small, charred lump. The Soviet Union wanted to hide the mess. They wanted a closed casket, a quiet hero's burial. But Komarov had left one final order. Before the flight, knowing he would die, he had told his superiors, "If anything happens, send my body home and leave the casket open." He wanted them to see. He wanted the generals, the politicians, the engineers who signed the papers to look at what they had done. And they did. There is a photo, hidden for years, of Komarov's funeral. In it, his remains are lying in an open coffin, and standing over him are the generals and a devastated Yuri Gagarin. Gagarin was never the same. He felt the guilt of his friend's sacrifice every day. Less than a year later, Gagarin himself would die in a mysterious plane crash. The two best friends lost to the shadow of the space race. History tells us about the triumphs, the flags on the moon, the footprints in the dust. But the shadow archives remind us of the cost. Vladimir Komarov didn't fall from space because of a mistake. He fell because he chose loyalty over life. He burned so his friend could live. Was it worth it? Look at the stars tonight, and you decide. This has been a file from the Shadow Archives. For more stories from the dark side of history, subscribe. And remember, the truth is often buried.